What's going on, guys? Joe here from 9 to 5 Escape. Today we're replacing the lower control arms on the 2005 4th Gen 4Runner. When we were in there doing the lift and leveling kit on the last video, we found out that the bushings were pretty shot and the ball joint was a little lacking in the grease area and the boot was a little crusty. So we're just going to replace the whole thing and forego just replacing the bushings and the ball joint itself. Just cheaper and easier to do it all in one shot. So let's get into it.
Here's a few tools you need for the job. A socket set, jack stands, a torque wrench, your lower control arms, a couple of Sharpies, some needle nose pliers, some vice grips, brake cleaner, penetrating oil, a 4-way lug wrench, and a jack. I also bought some cotter pins to go through the lower castle nut on the ball joint, but the lower control arms I bought came with some, so I didn't need those. Some other things not pictured here, sledgehammer to get the bracket off of the ball joint, and some screwdrivers to pry the clip ring off of the ball joint. You may need both of those, so pick some of those up. First step is to jack up the car, put it on jack stands, take off the front skid plate, and remove the tire. Definitely need to jack up the car from the frame. If you jack it up from the suspension system, you'll be fighting against yourself. And I definitely do recommend jacking the car up on both sides. I'll talk about that later and why you should do that. Next, you want to remove the tie rod end nut. It's a 17 millimeter. This is where I ran into issues of the tie rod being in tension because of having one wheel on the ground and one in the air. It creates too much tension to be able to pull the end out. So this is where I recommend definitely lifting the car from the full front end and getting both tires off the ground. Now you want to loosen the lower shock mount bolt. It's a 17 millimeter bolt. You can try to take the bolt out, but the compression of the spring will probably hold it in place, so we'll take it out later. Now you can move on to the lower control arm bolts. I would recommend cleaning the outside of the adjustment cams so you can draw on them with a Sharpie. You're going to be drawing a line on the cam itself and a line on the frame. That way you can line them up when you put it back together. There's going to be 4 adjustment cams, 2 on each arm of the lower control arm. You're going to want to mark all of those with a Sharpie. Once you get them all marked up, you can loosen the lower control arm bolts. There's going to be 2 of them and they are 19 millimeters. Now you want to remove the castle nut at the lower ball joint. There's a cotter pin that slides through the bolt and through the nut. So you're going to have to pry the tails off the cotter pin and then pull it through with some needle nose pliers or some vice grips. It's kind of stuck in there since the vehicle's older, so I opted for some vice grips to get a good hold on it and yank it out. Once the cotter pin's out, you can remove the castle nut. It's a 24 millimeter, so you might need to go buy an extra socket that's big enough. Make sure you take this off first before you take anything else off because it's pretty torqued down. You're going to need the leverage of all the other Titan bolts to take it off. Now you can remove the 2 19 millimeter bolts that hold the lower control arm to the knuckle. Now you want to get your punch and your hammer so we can remove the bolt going through the lower shock mount. Have someone hold the bottom of the lower control arm or put a jack under it because it is going to fall down as soon as you get that lower bolt out. The last thing holding up the lower control arm are the alignment bolts. You're going to want to take your 19mm and loosen these and take these out. The cams are a little bit weird how they go together, so make sure you keep it together when you take it off so you know how it goes back together. Once the bolts are out, the lower control arm should just pop right out. One of the trickier parts of the job is removing this retainer ring at the lower ball joint. You're going to want to use 2 screwdrivers or anything you can wedge in between the retainer ring and the ball joint. You want to wedge one side in and then hammer the other side. As you hammer one side, the other side is probably going to fall out. You just rinse and repeat, going back and forth. Eventually the retainer ring will just pop right off.
Boom.
Now the hardest part of the job is removing the bracket off of the ball joint. Mine is pretty old and stuck on there, so it took a sledgehammer to take it off. You want to prop up the lower control arm and the bracket on some 2x4s. This lets the ball joint fall down through the bracket so you can take it apart. Spray it down with some penetrating oil or some PB Blaster first, because it's probably pretty stuck on there. It took quite a few swings with the sledgehammer to get it knocked off, but it'll eventually pop off. Make sure to save this bracket and put it on your new lower control arm before you install it.
Boom.
Now you're ready to put everything back into place. Line up the new lower control arm into the receiver, and it may take a few swings of the hammer to get it knocked into place. The new bushings are a little bit wider than the old ones, so it's going to take a little elbow grease to get them into place. Once it's all lined up, you can put the alignment cams and bolts back into place. Now you can swing the lower control arm up and put the shock mount bolt through. This will hold it into place for you so you can attach to the knuckle easier. Put the bolt through and add the nut on. Don't tighten it down to torque yet. Once we get all the components together, then we'll torque it down. Now line up the lower control arm with the knuckle and install the 2 19mm bolts in the bottom. It's a bit tough to line these up with the holes in the knuckle, but if you stick some sort of screwdriver or pin or something through to line them up, it's pretty easy to get the bolt through and slide it up and hand tighten it.
Money? Money.
Now go back to the lower shock mount. Tighten the 19mm bolt to 100 foot-pounds. You're going to have to hold the other side of the nut with some pliers or some vice grips. Now you can tighten the castle nut at the lower ball joint. This is the 24mm, and you're going to want to torque it down to 103 foot-pounds. Once you get the bolt torqued down enough, you're going to want to put the cotter pin in. Make sure that you can see a hole through the castle nut. If you can't see a hole at all, you can tighten it a little more just to line it up to fit the pin through. Slide the pin through the hole and bend the tails back so it won't slide back through the hole.
That ain't going nowhere.
Now you can tighten the 19mm bolts at the bottom of the knuckle. These are a point of contention on how tight to make them. I've seen two service manuals, one where it says 166 foot-pounds and one that says 118 foot-pounds. I opted for middle ground and did about 130 foot-pounds. Now tighten the alignment bolts to 100 foot-pounds. These are the 19mm bolts that hold them in place. Make sure you align your Sharpie marks with the cam line to the frame line. That way your alignment is pretty close to where it was before, and you can drive it to the shop without putting too much wear on your tires. Remember that there's 4 cams to align for toe and camber.
Yeah.
The last part to put together is a sway bar end link. Slide the bolt through the hole and use a 17mm torque wrench to torque it down to 52 foot-pounds. Make sure you check for any tools you left on the car. Chris actually left my vice grips on the lower shock mount, and I drove away with them on. Backed out of the driveway and they fell off. Finally, you can put your tires back on. Torque your lug nuts down to 82 foot-pounds. Don't forget to put your skid plates back on before you drive away. I do recommend taking a test drive to make sure nothing was left on your car or broken. Just don't drive too far before you get in alignment. Driving around too much with a bad alignment will put some extra wear on your tires. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video helpful. If you like this video, hit that like button and subscribe button for us. It'll help us out. If you left anything out or you have any other questions, just leave them down below in the comments. We always reply to them. Don't forget to follow us on our social media accounts, 9to5escape on Facebook and Instagram, or check out our website, 9to5escape.org. We've got more information on our trips and modifications there. Catch you guys later.